Good evening, good morning. Welcome to week 5 for PSSL 6240, Political Violence and Terrorism at George Washington University. Just want to cover for this YouTube lecture, first starting off with just some admin notes. First, the Adobe Connect session is this Monday, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I will post that link out shortly today, so you all have it. And what we'll do this time is, instead of everyone clogging up the bandwidth on webcams, what we'll do is I'll be the only one on webcam, and when you participate, I will allow you to come on so you can then broadcast yourself. So instead of 20 people trying to talk simultaneously, it will just be one after another in sequence. So I think that might work out a little bit better this week. For this Adobe Connect session, the big thing I want to focus on is, well, two things. The first is paper number 2. Paper number 1 was okay, and I'll talk about that in a second, but there were some issues that I think could have been cleared up or should have been cleared up, and I think a couple of people went really off track with paper number 1. So what I'm going to ask for paper number 2 is that you come in already knowing the assignment and already having an idea of what you're going to write about, and then you bring it up in the Adobe Connect session, and we can kind of massage it, give you a little bit more guidance, get any other thoughts on that end. But that's what I really want to get that kind of cleared up. And then what I also want to do is, because I think it's important, and you may or may not be tested on it, but I think it's important, is I want to go a little bit depth into the case studies, the Shinrikyo, Hezbollah, IRA, Earth Liberation Front, that were part of the last discussion section, because I think those are very relevant case studies. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, based on your discussion posts, ask you to talk about your particular case study. And I'll give you a heads up who I'm going to ask to talk about it, but I will let you actually come on the Adobe Connect and talk in detail about your particular terrorist group, what the adaptation cycle was, why they were successful, why they were not successful, what they did wrong, what they did right. And I think I'm going to focus on those individual case studies so we can cross-pollinate, cross-collaborate the class, and get them spun up on the material. So that's for this Monday's Adobe Connect session. And for those of you who it shouldn't last longer than an hour. In fact, it'll probably last less, because I want to spend the last 10 to 15 minutes talking one-on-one with the people that I asked to talk to about paper number 1. So if I said in your comments, I want to talk to you at the Adobe Connect section, we'll talk at the end of it one-on-one in a separate kind of chat room, so I can make sure that everyone is prepped for paper number 2. And if you want to talk to me one-on-one, there's something issue with the grade or another question about the paper, you can do that as well at the Adobe Connect session. So I look forward to seeing everybody and hearing from everybody on Monday, 8 o'clock. So everyone should have their paper 1s marked. Just some kind of, everyone should have seen the comments I had, just some key points. Topic, stick to the question asked. A couple of you went way off topic. Some of you went into history. Some of you went into material that wasn't even asked. You guys have the question. You have the assignment. I thought I was pretty clear on this with the example and with the comments, but some people really veered off course on that. Second thing, and this is kind of another generic point, is grad school is meant not to give, I understand my arguments, I understand what I said in the lecture, I understand what's in the readings. Do not, on any of these papers, give me summaries of those readings, those lectures back to me. I know that. The whole point of grad school and higher level learning is that you can take those discussion lectures, take those discussion sections, and apply it to a particular problem. So that's where I'm going with this. I do not want you to revert back to me my lecture notes. I understand that. All right? I want you to be creative and to apply what you've learned to a particular scenario, to be somewhat original. So that's another, again, big generic point. That's going to be important in the next paper topics as they come along. Thirdly, and this is more specific, even if you did, and a lot of people did well on the papers, but even those who did well, what you fail to do is show me that the group you are representing, or the group you're talking about, represents the aggrieved people or does not represent the aggrieved people. And what I mean that specifically, for those of you who did the IRA, the people that did the IRA, Irish Republican Army, they said it was not a terrorist organization. And they said it was not a terrorist organization because it represents the people of Ireland. They represent the people of Northern Ireland in a legitimate struggle against the British oppressors, for lack of a better word. But you kind of assumed that. There is plenty of data out there that shows otherwise, that the IRA does not represent the will of the Irish Republic or of the Northern Ireland people. That goes for Al-Shabaab as well. A lot of people said Al-Shabaab was not a terrorist organization, and you said that because they don't represent the rank and file members of the resistance in Somalia. You have to prove that to me. Everyone kind of assumed that away. And for those of you who did that, I wrote in your comments that you did that, and that's the one thing. You have to show that if you think it's a terrorist organization, it doesn't represent the values of the people that it supposedly represents. Or if you don't think it's a terrorist organization, it does represent the values, or it does represent the organization, or it does represent the aggrieved people. So I want to make sure that's kind of clear at the onset. And then lastly, I'll be lenient on this the first time because I gave you the example, but a lot of you almost, I don't want to say copy and pasted, but used the criteria I said in the example and applied that to your organization. Some of it was okay. I prefer if you came up with your own kind of examples, your own format. That'll probably be the last time I give like a paper as an example for you to pursue forward. But other than that, papers were okay. The average score was about an 88. And so, half the students scored above that, half the students scored below that. Some of you really, really impressed me. And some of you, we've got some work to do, and we'll work on that the rest of the semester we have here. So just review of week 4, review the past week. I think everyone, good comments on the terrorist adaptation. A lot of you covered the pivot points, why success, why fail. I'm going to ask again 4 of you to talk in detail about that at this Adobe Connect session on Monday. So that's kind of where I'll leave that for now. As is. But moving on to the week 4, the WMD terrorism, I believe, and I think some people agreed with it, some people didn't, but I still believe that it is the greatest threat from a terrorist organization. It is that WMD threat. However, I also believe that that threat could be blown out of proportion and could be misconstrued and could be used for ends that don't really match the actual threat. And the big example is Iraq. And again, to give you a kind of a segue or side note here, I would like to think you guys are studying higher, postgraduate, post-college education to get a deeper understanding of what you hear in current events or what's on the news, so you don't fall susceptible to some of the intelligence failures around Iraq. I can still remember, and many of you could probably remember what it was like to be in 2002, 2003, where the intelligence was more, it wasn't intelligence, it was information to scare the crap out of people. And that's what led us down the road to Iraq. Nobody at the time asked the questions, questions about intelligence, about sources, about science, about is WMD a threat? Will a terrorist, will a leader give WMD to a terrorist organization? No one really asked those questions or evaluated that information correctly. And when you didn't have that, you get the WMD intelligence failure that later became Iraq. And that's kind of where your assignment, which I'll talk about in a second, where your assignment kind of leads to it, is you're going to be asked to be to analyze a news report that's related to WMD terrorism and actually try and go beyond the superficialities and ask if this is an actual threat. So I'll talk about that in a second. But then the two case studies, you had Shinrikyo, which that CNAS article went in detail. And the one thing, again, to review is how did Shinrikyo, how do they acquire WMD? How do they acquire the sarin? How do they produce it? How do they scale it up to such a level that they're able to conduct numerous attacks with the sarin? How did they disseminate it? What did they do wrong in disseminating it that resulted in being less than successful, or less than successful? And why did they do it? Why did they choose to cross that threshold and go into the WMD terrorist realm? So Shinrikyo, we went into that case study pretty much in detail. And then the Rajneeshis we kind of covered. I gave a little bit more of a broad overview on that, but same questions on how they procured it, how they disseminated it, and why, what was their intent. So based on that, based on the WMD terrorism scenario, that's where paper 2 is coming from. And you have for paper 2 two potential topics. The first one is ricin related to Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and that was a threat that came out about 3 years ago. And then you have something more current, Syria and WMD, or WMD terrorism. And the question there is, could a terrorist get its hand in the chaos that's now Syria? Could a terrorist get its hands on the Syrian chemical weapons and employ it against the United States? So you're trying to answer those questions. Either choose one, don't do both. Just choose one and try and answer those questions. Is this a threat? Is it worth it? And the best way to kind of approach this is kind of a real-world scenario. And you have to pretend like your boss, whether you work at an intelligence agency, you work at Homeland Security, you work for a state or local official, he reads that article that I assign, and then he goes to somebody like you and says, is this truth? Is this ground truth? Do I need to worry about this? And then he'll say to you, have a memo to me by close of business today that tells me whether I need to worry or not. And I think if you've worked in the national security field and intelligence community, you probably have had to do that task before. So this is kind of rolls along with that kind of flash to bang tasker. So what I want you to do is make an argument. Say, yes, it's a threat. No, it's not a threat. Go one way or another, and then every paragraph, in fact, every sentence should back up your argument. And this assignment, I'm going to actually be pretty strict on. That 1,500 words is the maximum. Don't give me a paper with 1,520 words. 1,500 words is the maximum. And the best way to look at it is every sentence, every paragraph has to earn its way onto this memo. It has to strengthen your argument in some way. So if you're struggling to put fluff material into this short paper, you're already wrong. So what I want to see in this paper are four things. I want you to talk about the science behind the WMD threat in question. And what I want you to do specifically is say, there's characteristics of ricin, there's characteristics of sarin that make it more of a threat or less of a threat. If you don't think it's a threat, then explain why the science limits the terrorist organization. Why does the science, why does the employment of ricin, why does it limit? Why does the employment of sarin limit the terrorist group? Or if you think it is a threat, then explain why the science behind the WMD makes it more of a threat. I hope that was clear on that. The next thing I want you to talk about is the intent of the group. In the lecture, we talked about why Al-Qaeda may not want to conduct terrorist attack or WMD terrorism attack, but Shinrikyo does. So talk about the intent. Does this terrorist group want to conduct an attack using WMD? It might. It might not. Make that decision. Then policy recommendations. That's the third thing to talk about. What policies do you think, from whether you're looking at it from a state, local official, whether you're looking at it at a federal level, whether you're looking at congressional level, what policies should be implemented to mitigate the threat? And then finally, rebuttal arguments. If you're saying that Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and ricin is not a threat, then you need to address those that think that it is a threat. And you need to give some counter arguments to your boss if he's going to say that. So those are kind of the 4 things I want in the paper. But the most important thing is I want you to argue your position with every sentence, every paragraph in this short memo. So that covers paper 2. Please, have an idea of coming into the Adobe Connect session so that we can talk about it in more detail. So especially for those of you who I mentioned in this past paper, so we can get you guys on the right track. So with that being said, introduction to week 5. One thing I'm going to say is I'm going to add 2 more readings to week 5. I know that's they're short readings, easy to read, so they're not going to be too much in detail. But Zakaria, there's another Fareed Zakaria article from Newsweek he wrote a few years back that's relevant to U.S. counterterrorism strategy. And then Daniel Byman at the Brookings Institute wrote an article on Israeli counterterrorism that I think will add to this week. But what this week is strategy, counterterrorism strategy. What do countries do that works? What's effective? What's not effective? And we'll look in detail at the United States, at the European Union, and Israel. And I think the important thing when devising strategy is you see all these strategy documents that come out related to counterterrorism, and some are good, some aren't, but good ones choose. They choose what's important. Bad strategy just becomes a laundry list of things that you need to do. Anyone can write a laundry list of these are the 50 things we need to do to defeat terrorism. Good strategy says these are the 3 or 4 important things that are going to have the most cascading effects, and this is what we should focus our resources on. And good strategy leaves things out. That's important to look at, and that's kind of a overriding point. So we talk about U.S. counterterrorism strategy. We look at the Bush administration. We look at the Obama administration. I don't want to get political in this section, but we say what was good from the first administration, from the Bush administration, what was good from Obama, what was bad on both sides. The EU, the Monar article, goes into detail of struggles that the European Union faces with counterterrorism. And finally, we come to Israel, which is generally thought of as the gold standard when it comes to counterterrorism. But there have problems. There's some issues with it, and I bring it up in the lecture, and I bring it up it's brought up in the readings, and it's important. It's brought up by Professor Gora, who I've assigned for you to watch his presentation. And he talks about the balance between civil liberties and striking the right balance. He also talks about what is effective, what works. Israel does a lot of things, and a lot of things don't work, and he talks about that in detail. So, with that being said, I enjoy everyone's participation on the discussion sections. I look forward to seeing you guys on Monday at the Adobe Connect sessions. And if there's any questions or issues, please let me know.